The heavy oak doors of the boardroom creaked open, but nobody looked up. To the 12 men sitting around the mahogany table, Elena was just the coffee girl. She was 24, wore oversized sweaters to hide her frame, and always kept her eyes glued to the carpet. For 3 years, she had been the invisible ghost of Sterling Holdings, moving silently between the high-powered executives, refilling cups and clearing away crumpled papers filled with million-dollar secrets. The CEO, Marcus Sterling, was a man who measured human worth by the weight of a wristwatch. He was currently mid-law, mocking a rival's bankruptcy. "Some people just aren't built for the top," he sneered, waving a dismissive hand at Elena as she poured his espresso. "They're born to serve, born to be told what to do. Right, sweetheart?" Elena didn't flinch. She simply nodded, wiped a stray drop of coffee from the table, and retreated to the shadows of the corner. Marcus didn't know that Elena's oversized sweaters covered a posture of discipline, nor did he know that the blank stare he mocked was actually a hyper-focused mind recording every word, every bribe, and every illegal offshore transfer mentioned in that room. He saw a girl who struggled to pay rent. She saw a man who had built a kingdom on a foundation of sand. The underdog trope works because of the asterisk information gap. The villain thinks he knows everything because he has the money, but the underdog knows everything because she has the access. The climax began on a Tuesday. Sterling Holdings was celebrating a massive merger, a deal built on forged signatures and predatory loans. Marcus stood at the head of the table, raising a crystal glass. "To being untouchable," he toasted. "Actually, Marcus," a voice rang out. It wasn't loud, but it was clear. It had a resonance that stopped every heartbeat in the room. The executives turned. Elena was no longer standing in the corner. She was at the head of the table, leaning against the doorframe. She wasn't holding a coffee pot. She was holding a sleek, black tablet. "You're very touchable," she said, her voice devoid of the stutter she had faked for 3 years. "Specifically by the SEC and the Department of Justice." Marcus laughed, though it sounded forced. "The coffee girl has a backbone? Put the toy away, Elena, and go get the champagne. The coffee girl is a senior forensic accountant," Elena replied, tapping the screen. Suddenly, the massive projector behind Marcus, which was supposed to show the merger logo, flickered to life. Instead, it displayed a spider web of shell companies, all leading back to Marcus's private accounts. "I've spent 1,000 days being invisible. I've heard every whispered bribe and seen every deleted email. You thought I was too simple to understand your business. In reality, you were too arrogant to see your own executioner." The room descended into a panicked chill. Marcus lunged for the tablet, but the doors burst open. Federal agents, who had been waiting for Elena's signal, flooded the room. As Marcus was led out in handcuffs, his face a mask of purple rage and disbelief, he walked past Elena. She didn't gloat. She didn't shout. She simply picked up a discarded coffee cup from the table and set it in the trash. "You were right about one thing, Marcus," she whispered as he passed. "Some people are built for the top, but you can't stay there if you're too busy looking down on the people holding up the ladder." The silent victim had spoken, and in one afternoon, she had dismantled a titan. The underdog didn't just win. She redefined who held the true power in the room. The ballroom was a sea of silk and arrogance, but all eyes were fixed on the center of the room where the city's most ruthless venture capitalist, Julian Vane, stood holding a microphone. Beside him stood Clara, his personal assistant of 5 years. She was dressed in a muted gray suit, her hair pulled back so tightly it looked painful. To the onlookers, she was a piece of office furniture that happened to breathe. Julian took a long sip of his $1,000 scotch and gestured toward her, with a lazy, mocking grin. "I want to thank Clara," he announced, his voice booming through the speakers. "Without her, I'd have no one to blame when the Wi-Fi goes down, or someone to fetch my dry cleaning at 3 a.m. She's the perfect employee because she doesn't have enough ambition to be dangerous. Just a loyal, quiet little mouse." A ripple of cruel laughter moved through the elite crowd. Clara stood perfectly still. Her face didn't flush. Her hands didn't shake. She simply looked at Julian with a faint, unreadable expression. "Julian," she said, her voice small but amplified by the lapel mic she was already wearing for the presentation. "You forgot to mention the most important thing I do for you." Julian snickered, leaning in close to her, smelling of expensive cigars. "What's that? Reminding me to breathe?" "Don't push your luck, Clara. You're lucky I let you into this room." "I keep your secrets," she whispered. The room went deathly quiet. That was the asterisk information gap. Every person in that room, investors, politicians, rivals, suddenly leaned forward. They didn't care about Julian's success anymore. They wanted to know what the mouse was hiding. Julian's smile faltered, a flicker of genuine fear crossing his eyes for a split second before his mask of bravado returned. "Secrets? You're delusional. Go sit down," he hissed, reaching to grab her arm. Clara stepped back, her heels clicking sharply on the marble. "The secret isn't that you're a bully, Julian. Everyone here already knows that. The secret is that the Project Phoenix merger you just signed, the one that doubled your net worth tonight, it doesn't exist." The high-stakes hook had fully set the trap. Julian's face turned a shade of gray that matched Clara's suit. "Shut up," he growled, lunging for her mic, but two men from the back of the room stepped forward. Not his security, but federal agents Clara had been meeting with for months. Clara pulled a small, silver flash drive from her pocket and held it up like a trophy. "You called me a mouse, Julian, but you forgot that mice live in the walls. They see the mold, the rot, and the structural failures long before the owner does. I didn't just fetch your dry cleaning. I photographed every forged document in your safe. I recorded every bribe you paid to the zoning board. And while you were busy insulting me at the podium, I was busy hitting send on a mass email to every investor in this room." Phones across the ballroom began to chime and vibrate simultaneously. Panic erupted. People began checking their screens, seeing the cold, hard evidence of a Ponzi scheme that made Julian's empire look like a house of cards in a hurricane. Julian fell back against the podium, the microphone emitting a sharp, piercing feedback screech. He looked at the woman he had spent years belittling, realizing that his biggest mistake wasn't the fraud. It was the assumption that the person serving him was too small to destroy him. Clara walked past him, heading toward the exit. She didn't look at the chaos she had unleashed. She didn't need to. She had turned a public insult into a public execution, proving that the most dangerous person in the room is often the one you refuse to see. The engagement ring on Maya's finger was a 4-carat diamond that felt like a lead weight. To Elias Thorne, the tech mogul known for his disruptive software and legendary temper, it was a brand. It signaled to the world that he had finally conquered the one thing money couldn't buy, a woman who didn't care about his billions. For 18 months, Maya had played the part of the devoted, slightly tech-naive fiancée. She laughed at his jokes, organized his gala guest lists, and listened. Really listened. As he bragged about his ghost protocol, a hidden layer of code that allowed him to move untraceable capital across borders. He thought he was training her. He thought he was molding a trophy wife into a confidante. He had no idea he was being audited in real time. The double identity twist works because it recontextualizes every romantic gesture into a tactical maneuver. The candlelit dinners weren't about love. They were about proximity to his unlocked workstation. The weekend trips to the Swiss Alps weren't for skiing. They were to verify the location of physical servers. The tension reached its breaking point on the night of their engagement party. Elias stood on the balcony of his penthouse, looking out over the city he thought he owned. He pulled Maya close, his arm draped possessively over her shoulder. "I trust you more than anyone, Maya," he whispered, his voice uncharacteristically soft. "Which is why tomorrow, I'm giving you full administrative access to the Ghost Protocol. If anything happens to me, you control the Empire." Maya felt a flicker of something. Guilt, perhaps, but it was quickly extinguished by the memory of the thousands of families Elias had bankrupted to build that empire. "I'm honored, Elias," she said, her voice steady, "but I think I already have everything I need." The next morning, the personal relationship evaporated like mist. Elias woke up to find the bed empty and his laptop missing. When he checked his primary accounts, he saw a single notification. Access revoked. Panicked. He rushed to his office, only to find the elevators locked and the lobby swarming with federal agents. In the center of the chaos stood Maya, but the sundress and the engagement ring were gone. She was wearing a tactical navy blazer and a badge that identified her as a lead investigator for the Federal Financial Crimes Division. "Maya," Elias stammered, his bravado crumbling. "What is this? Is this some kind of joke?" "The name is Agent Sterling Elias," she said, her tone professional and icy. "And the joke is that you spent 18 months explaining your crimes to the very person assigned to document them. Every romantic whisper about your offshore accounts was recorded. Every gift you bought me was logged as evidence of money laundering." The betrayal was cinematic. Elias didn't just lose his money, he lost his reality. The intimacy he thought he had built was a carefully constructed cage. He realized that while he was looking at a fiancée, she was looking at a target. As he was led away, Maya looked down at the empty spot on her finger where the diamond had been. She didn't feel like a bride who had lost a groom. She felt like an architect who had finally finished a blueprint. The double identity was the ultimate weapon. It proved that, in a world of high-tech security and encrypted firewalls, the greatest vulnerability is always the human heart, especially when it's blinded by its own ego. The ticking of the clock in the silent boardroom sounded like a countdown. Julian Vane, the man who owned half the city's skyline, leaned back in his leather chair, a smirk cutting across his face. Across from him sat a woman who, until 5 minutes ago, had been his most loyal assistant. "You're making a mistake, Sarah," Julian said, his voice a smooth purr of misplaced confidence. "You're a footnote in my biography, a shadow. Shadows don't start fires." Sarah didn't waste time with a rebuttal. She didn't offer a long, emotional speech about her years of service or the way he'd belittled her. She simply slid a single sheet of paper across the mahogany table. "Account number 44098821, she said. The smirk on Julian's face didn't vanish, but it stiffened. "What is that? My dry cleaning bill?" "Cayman Islands," Sarah replied, her voice sharp as a razor. "Branch office of a bank that doesn't officially exist. Current balance, 0. Because 10 minutes ago, I authorized a transfer of every cent of that laundered capital to the victims of your 2024 housing scam." Julian's laughter died in his throat. This was the power of asterisk verbal impact. No fluff, no filler. Just a sequence of facts that hit like physical blows. He stood up, his chair skidding back with a harsh screech. "You're lying. You don't have the codes. You're a girl who gets my coffee." Sarah leaned forward, her eyes locked on his. "The coffee you drink every morning was prepared by a woman whose father lost his home because of you." I didn't just get your codes, Julian. I watched you type them for 3 years. I memorized the rhythm of your fingers. 7AX-9. Julian lunged for the phone on his desk, his movements frantic and uncoordinated. His hand hovered over the receiver, but his fingers were shaking so violently he couldn't press the buttons. The shadow was now the only light in the room, and it was burning him. The board of directors is in the lobby, Sarah continued, her pacing relentless. The police are in the parking garage. And your lawyers? They've already stopped answering your calls. The physical collapse was sudden. Julian didn't fall. He deflated. His knees buckled, and he sank back into his chair, but missed the seat, landing heavily on the floor. His $5,000 suit was wrinkled, his face a ghostly pale mask of sweat and terror. He looked up at her, breathing in short, ragged gasps. Why? He wheezed. Because you assumed that, because I was quiet. I was empty, Sarah said, standing over him. She didn't look down with pity, only with the cold satisfaction of a job finished. You thought my silence was submission. It was actually observation. She turned and walked toward the door. She didn't look back to see him clutching his chest, or to hear him begging. She had delivered the final blow with nothing more than a string of numbers and a few well-placed sentences. In the world of power, the man who speaks the most usually has the least to say. Sarah had spoken less than 50 words, and with them, she had ended an empire. As she stepped out into the hallway, the sound of the heavy doors closing behind her was the final punctuation mark on Julian Vane's life as a king. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was the sound of justice. Delivered with surgical precision, the rain lashed against the windows of the courtroom, a cold backdrop to the heated drama inside. Arthur Vance, the billionaire real estate tycoon, sat at the defense table, adjusting his silk tie with a smirk. He didn't look like a man on trial. He looked like a man waiting for a reservation at a 5-star restaurant. Across the room sat Mrs. Gable, a 70-year-old widow who had lost her family home and her dignity to one of Arthur's predatory development schemes. The moral justice theme thrives on the collision between arrogance and dignity. Arthur represented the former, the belief that enough zeros in a bank account could erase any sin. Mrs. Gable represented the latter, the quiet, unbreakable strength of someone who has nothing left to lose but their truth. Let's be realistic, Arthur's lawyer whispered loudly during a recess, leaning toward Mrs. Gable's small table. You're a grandmother with a pension. Mr. Vance owns the firm that built this courthouse. Take the settlement and go buy a nice condo in Florida. Why choose to be a victim? Mrs. Gable looked the lawyer in the eye. She didn't shout. She didn't cry. I'm not a victim, she said softly. I'm a witness. And witnesses don't settle for condos. The trial reached its peak when Arthur took the stand. He was confident, charming, and condescending. He spoke of urban progress and inevitable economic shifts. To him, Mrs. Gable's home was just a square on a blueprint that needed to be cleared. Mr. Vance, the prosecutor asked, did you know that the eviction notice served to Mrs. Gable was backdated to bypass the legal appeal window? Arthur chuckled, a sound of pure arrogance. My staff handles thousands of documents. I don't look at dates. I look at results. People like Mrs. Gable should be thanking me for cleaning up their neighborhoods. If they can't keep up with the world, that's hardly my fault. The gallery gasped. Arthur's arrogance had finally blinded him to the optics of the room. He had just admitted on record that he viewed human lives as obstacles to his results. Then came the moment of dignity. The prosecutor handed Mrs. Gable a small, weathered leather book. It was her late husband's ledger. He had been the foreman for the very first building Arthur's father had ever constructed. Read the inscription, Mrs. Gable, the prosecutor said. She opened the book, her hand steady. To my most honest worker, she read, her voice filling the silent room. May you always remind my son that a building is only as strong as the integrity of the men who lay the bricks. Signed, Thomas Vance Sr. The courtroom went silent. The arrogance of the son had been dismantled by the legacy of the father. Arthur's face went from smug to ashen. The connection was undeniable. He had destroyed the home of the very woman whose family had helped build his empire. The verdict was swift and devastating. Arthur wasn't just fined. He was ordered to restore the properties he had illegally seized. But the real moral justice wasn't the money. It was the moment the cameras caught Arthur being led out the side exit to avoid the press, looking small and defeated, while Mrs. Gable walked down the main steps of the courthouse. She stopped at the bottom, tucked her husband's ledger under her arm, and looked up at the clearing sky. She hadn't won a fortune. She had reclaimed her name. Viewers stay until the end for this specific feeling, the moment where the world rights itself. When the arrogant fall and the dignified rise, it creates a moral victory that resonates deeper than any action scene. Subscribe to witness more stories where truth finally catches up to power.